from eMaint Enterprises. And welcome and thank you for joining us for this month's Best Practices webinar. And I'm really pleased to have with me a speaker who's new to our program, but certainly not new to the industry, and that's Joel Beal, who is the managing partner and COO at JBA Telematics. And he's going to be presenting today's topics: electronic data log mandate, or ELD, and what those of you that are work with fleets need to know. And before I introduce Joel, I would just like to, one point of clarification, because eMaint does offer a variety of webinars, and the best practices webinars are not eMaint product demonstrations. Rather, they're more industry best practices on various topics that affect different maintenance managers. So we invite guest speakers and industry experts such as Joel. So for those of you that are interested in eMaint product demos, they take place at a different time. Shoot me an email and I'll share that with you. But in any case, Joel, I'm really glad you could join us today. And while people are logging in, Joel, we probably don't often enough do these best practices sessions specifically about fleet maintenance. And maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about telematics, how you kind of came to be involved in eMaint, and how this topic today, what kind of prompted you to put together this session, why it might be important.
Well, thanks, Verona, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, this ELD mandate, electronic logging device mandate, is something that we've known has been coming since 1999. So if you have commercial motor vehicles, if you have heavy trucks that have CDL drivers, this probably affects you. And we'll talk about the details. But yeah, this is actually, Rona, this is a fairly old industry. And I guess if you're kind of into mechanics and electronics like I am, you might find it interesting. Some people don't. But this actually all started back in 1976, believe it or not, when the Department of Energy put together an initiative called the Joint Truck and Bus Fuel Economy Initiative, and their purpose was, this in the middle of the fuel crisis, and by the way, I was 10 years old in 1976, I don't remember this, but it was right in the middle of the fuel crisis, and our government was trying to help fleet owners come up with ways to save fuel. And this is back in the early days before radial tires and fan clutches and aerodynamic devices. So the government was helping fleets test these various devices to see if they affected fuel economy, but they did not have a measuring device on the truck to see the impact. So they put out a no-bid contract to Rockwell International. I guess they figured if Rockwell could build a space shuttle, they could build a telematics device. And in 1978, they rolled out the first telematics device for testing. And in 1982, Rockwell took this idea and commercialized it, made it much, much smaller, much, much cheaper. In 1982, the Rockwell Tripmaster was born. It was the first telematics device, and the first customer was JB Hunt Transport. And in 1988, these devices advanced rapidly. Now, of course, this is before GPS, so everything was wired directly into the truck. This was before engine data buses and ECMs, so sensors were installed, sensors were wired. It was a big deal putting these things in. By 1988, these devices had matured to the point to where they allowed you, if you chose to, do electronic logs. And that's where I came in. I was fairly fresh out of college. I was working for a tanker fleet based out of Omaha, but I was in Nevada at the time. And because of the nature of the product we hauled, highly dangerous, and the public was highly skeptical about us hauling this product, so we voluntarily installed telematics devices. And I've been involved with them ever since. And in 1994, I left the fleet and went to work for Tripmaster. And I've been in that business ever since. And in 2007, I left after a pretty good career there, and we started this organization called JBA Telematics. And we are a reseller for LoadTrack, which is a transportation management system that includes an ELD. And we're also a reseller for eMaint. And we came across eMaint because our customers were looking for a very good cloud-based CMMS, a maintenance program. And I was having a very difficult time finding one to help them. And one of my customers brought eMaint to me and said, you got to check this out. And I did, and we signed up as a reseller, and we've been very happy. It's a wonderful program, and it works beautifully for our clients, interfaces with our telematics device. It's just been a good relationship.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Joel. Appreciate the background. And for the record, I too remember 1976, but I won't tell anyone how old I was because we're recording today's presentation. But no, it's always good to kind of hear the history that led us to today. And for our eMaint clients out there, for more information about how we integrate with telematics, if you have questions about that, we'll be happy to answer them after the session. So just a couple of housekeeping items before I let Joel get into the heart of his presentation. I am recording the presentation. We'll share a link to that recording with all of the attendees today. I have your phones on mute, but Joel has graciously agreed to stay as long as we need to and answer any questions right up till the hour if need be. And so please go ahead and type your questions at any time, and I'll read them to Joel at the conclusion of the webinar. And he also did say that he'd be happy to share a copy of the slides or a PDF of the presentation. So there'll be a little survey at the end where you can just indicate that you'd like to get a copy. All right, and so without further ado, Joel, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thanks, Rona. What we'd like to talk about today is kind of a couple things. A brief background of electronic logging devices, the new ELD rule, the technical requirements, which you really do need to know a little bit about that because you're going to be asked to pick a system. The certification process, just so you know what us vendors have to go through, and then what to expect during an audit. And we're going to spend a good deal of time on exactly how these devices look and what to look for. So I guess first off, so that we know the level of expertise out in the audience, Rona, if you could launch the poll question.
Sure. So if you don't mind, and this will help Joel determine, how familiar you already are with the electronic device mandate. So please indicate if you would, you're not familiar at all, but you feel you need to know, and that's why you're here today, or you might have some familiarity, or you're very familiar, you work with ELDs every day, but you just might be here also to pick up a few tips or things you may not know. All right, so it looks like about 80% of the people have responded. I'll give you a couple more seconds. Okay, let me go and close that and share it. So it looks like, Joel, that we have 2/3 of the audience, 67%, have no familiarity, just getting started. About 1/4 of the audience, 24%, have some familiarity, and then 10% are very familiar and work with ELDs. So it looks like we have about 90% that are either not or somewhat familiar.
Perfect.
Okay?
That's kind of what I expected. Thank you, Rona. And for you 10% who are familiar with this, we'll expect some really good questions out of you guys. Let's get started on the background. So this all started the year before I graduated college, and a company by the name of Frito-Lay was using a vendor by the name of KDEC, and they were granted a waiver from the US DOT to do electronic logs. Again, this is before GPS. So these devices required a lot of work on behalf of the driver. He had to type in a location code every time he stopped, but it did automate much of electronic logs. It worked very, very well, so that in 1988, September 30th to be exact, 1988, the DOT allowed what they called automatic onboard recording devices, or AOBRDs. So since 1988, we have been allowed to use electronic devices to automate drivers' hours of service. So this is absolutely not new at all. Been around for a very long time. And The reason the federal government likes these devices is because they may not be perfect, but they really help drivers. They really help drivers keep track of their logs, much greater log accuracy. Been very beneficial for the people who have installed them. So since 1988, we've been operating under these same rules, and we've been operating under these rules until 2003, when the changes started to occur. And this was when the first ELBR mandate was proposed. Now, ELBR is an acronym that's been around for over 10 years, and we'll talk a little bit about this, but this ELBR mandate, which was proposed in 2003, in 2004, a bunch of us started working on the ELBR rule, and by us, it was people in industry like me, it was carriers, it was federal officials, and we all met in these work groups and put together an ELBR Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, NPRM. And it didn't work. What happened was in 2010, we actually put out the NPRM. 2011, a lawsuit was filed, and because of this lawsuit, the ELBR rule was scrapped before it ever saw the light of day. So again, electronic logs first came out in 1988. The first attempt at a mandate was in 2003. 2010, they finally came out with a rule, but in 2011 they shut it down. And here's what happened. And this is important because it really ties into why the current rule looks the way it looks. In 1988, Congress passed a law. So again, Congress in 1988, they saw the U.S. DOT allowing electronic devices to be used to do logs. And so Congress was concerned. And the Truck and Bus Regulatory Reform Act of 1988 required that any electronic device in the truck not be used to harass the driver. Harass was kind of loosely defined, but it was clear that the FMCSA did not address driver harassment in this ELBR rule. So OIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Driver Association, filed a lawsuit and they won. The ELBR mandate was kicked out. But in 2012, Congress passed a law called MAP 21, and in this huge highway authorization bill was a mandate for electronic logging devices, and that's why you guys are here today, because every driver today, with only a couple of exceptions, every driver today, regardless of fleet size, who does paper logs must move over to electronic logs. MAP 21 is kind of significant because the previous attempts at a mandate were regulatory. And by regulatory, they go through the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking process. The agency in charge, which is the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, in this case, the agency in charge comes up with this regulation. They put it out there for the public to comment on, and the public can comment, good or bad. And then it goes back to the agency, and then it goes to the White House. So when it's a regulation, the checks and balances is the agency comes up with it, they consider public comments, and then the White House has a final say. Whereas legislation, like MAP 21, it was a bipartisan deal. It was proposed in the House, passed by the Senate, both of which were controlled by Republicans, I believe, at the time, and passed and signed into law by a Democrat president. So they put a deadline of October 2013. They put a deadline for publication of this final rule. So 2 years after the deadline, they actually published it. So the FMCSA, is kind of ironic, was 2 years late publishing their own rule. But here are the deadlines. The deadlines are, if you do not have any device in the cab of your truck right now, if you're running paper logs, you have until December 18th of 2017 to get compliant. If you have an older device, an ALBRD, and it could be a 20-year-old device, it could be a 2-year-old device, it could be a 2-month-old device. If you have an ALBRD in your truck, then your deadline is extended another 2 years to December 16th of 2019. The reason why FMCSA is doing this, and you can debate whether this should be mandated or not, just for the record, I believe in electronic logs. I have seen the benefits to the fleets. I'm not so sure they should have been mandated, but regardless of what my beliefs are, they are mandated, and here's why the FMCSA did it. They estimate avoid 1,844 crashes, save 26 lives. The FMCSA knows that it will improve hours of service compliance, and the FMCSA knows that it will automate to some extent compliance audits. They know it's going to make their job easier. So today, the rule that we're operating under today, onboard computers and electronic logging devices are common, but they're not ubiquitous. So you'll see signs like this on trucks, but 2 years from now there'll be no need for it because it will be assumed that every truck's going to have a device in it. So the rule, again, the rule was finally published in February 2014, or finally, the notice was finally put out there, published in 2014, and the actual rule was published December 16th of 2015, and there are 4 areas covered in this supplemental notice. So the rule covers 4 basic areas, and of these 4 basic areas, 1 affects me, the vendor, and 3 affect you, the fleets. And again, if you have 1 truck, 100 trucks, 1,000 trucks, in the eyes of the FMCSA, everyone's all the same. So number 1, it establishes minimal technical standards. The standards that us vendors are operating under right now have been in place since 1988. There's been clarifications, there's been unwritten best practices. The fact of the matter is we are adhering to very old standards, and they're not very clear. So the new standards are very clear. Number 2, it directs all drivers who use logs to begin using an ELD. Number 3, and this is brand new, and this is going to require a little bit of discussion, exact requirements for supporting documents. These are new and different. Supporting documents requirements are meant to validate non-driving time. An ELD can capture driving time. It does not capture all non-driving time, or may not capture all non-driving time. So supporting documents validate this non-driving time. And then lastly, prohibits driver harassment. So just to kind of clear things up, we're still running under the AOBRD rule that's been in effect since September of 1988. There never was an AOBR, and the next rule is the ELD rule, which for most of you kicks in December of 2017. So let's talk about what is an ELD. An ELD is simply an electronic device, and for the most part, these are existing devices. An ELD is simply a modern rule that mandates the use of a device and says what it does. And what it does is, number 1, it captures all commercial motor vehicle CMV movement. And it captures it not from GPS, but from wheel movement. Talk about this in a little bit. It does not allow deletion of driving time, so you can't go in and edit out driving time, but it does not capture all of the driver's time, or it may not capture, which is why they put in supporting documentation. Has to be tamper-proof to a certain degree, to a reasonable degree, and it gives drivers much more control over their logs than a current rule. So an ELD is simply a telematics device that is connected into the truck, that captures movement, allows drivers to change their status. Think of punching in and out on a time card. And it is a little different, and it does give drivers a little more control over their electronic logs. So who has to comply? And the answer is every driver who keeps a paper log today has to comply tomorrow, with 3 exceptions. Number 1 is a time card driver. And a time card driver is a driver who operates a heavy vehicle, commercial motor vehicle, within 100 air miles of their base. They never leave a 100 air mile radius. Or if you're a CDL driver operating a smaller vehicle, it's 150 air miles. Kind of a detail. In any case, you don't have to use logs. You're not using logs today. Instead of a log, you're using payroll sheets or time cards. You're not using logs, therefore you don't have to comply with the ELD mandate. You don't have to. You may choose to, and there's reasons to do it, but you don't have to. Number two is drive away, tow away. So these companies that move equipment around, they move new trucks from the factory to dealers, those types of operations. It's not practical to ask them to temporarily install an ELD just to tear it out when they get there. So drive away, tow away operations where other companies are moving your equipment for you or for a dealer or for the factory. They don't have to comply. And then lastly, commercial motor vehicles manufactured before 2000. If you have a truck that's 1999 or older, you don't have to comply. And the reason is older trucks ran on a protocol called J1708. Our company, we recognize J1708. All of the major companies do, but some of the smaller players in the ELD field don't know what J1708 is. And so the FMCSA decided, rather than to just open up a whole confusing situation, to just exempt trucks manufactured prior to 2000. So let's talk about supporting documents for a minute, because this is brand new. You can keep, it's kind of funny, they limit how many supporting documents that you can turn in. You can turn in up to 8 supporting documents for a 24-hour period. These must be submitted within 8 days, so the driver has 8 days to get these documents from the cab of the truck to you in the office. And these supporting documents must be produced at the roadside if requested, and the carrier must maintain them for 6 months. And a supporting document is a bill of lading or a dispatch record, a trip record, expense receipts, toll receipts, mobile communications records, or payroll. That's what a supporting document is. And by definition, a supporting document contains a driver name, date, time, and location. So think of it this way, and we'll talk about this a little later, but a supporting document is a paper trail so that when they look at your electronic log, they can see that you didn't log on until 9 o'clock this morning, but there's a toll road receipt back at 8 o'clock this morning. You were obviously driving, you just chose not to log on. That's the purpose of supporting documentation. So let's talk a little bit about the technical requirements. And by the way, guys, I'm sure you'll have a bunch of questions. Write them down. We'll get to them. We'll spend as much time on questions as we possibly can up until our hour is up. So let's talk about technical requirements. Number one, when you're shopping for a device, I just got to break the news to you. There's a lot of good, reputable vendors out there. This is not a sales pitch. You're going to find them on your own, but there's a lot of good, reputable vendors out there. Many of us have been in business for years. And then there's some companies who haven't been around that long, and maybe they're a little unclear on all of this. So that's why we're going to talk about technical requirements. These are the questions that you need to ask to make sure that the device that you're looking at is actually compliant. So number one, it has to be connected to the engine control module, the ECM. And the ECM provides the engine power status, is the engine on or off. It provides the distance, the motion status, are we moving or stationary, and engine hours. And it does this, since this is an eMaint thing, you guys are probably pretty up on the technology. Generally, we do this via a data protocol called J1939. It could be via one of the OBD2 protocols, all of which are derivatives of CAN. So we use one of these, or J1708 if you have older trucks and if you choose to use 1708. So it's one of these protocols. It's 2 simple wires, and this network in the vehicles, whether it's OBD2, J1939, CAN, whatever, is made for devices like this, and it's made so that components within the truck can talk to each other. The anti-lock brakes can talk to the cruise control, which talks to the clutch pedal, which talks to the engine, all that. So specifically, the FMCSA was very specific about not using GPS to derive distance, that you must use the ECM, which in turn uses speed sensors to increment the odometer. It's all about odometer. And it sounds kind of silly, but the reason is because in tests, especially out in Oregon, University of Oregon did some tests back in early 2000s, different manufacturers measure distance with GPS in different ways. Some do the breadcrumb drop to breadcrumb drop. So if you have a windy road, you're going to lose distance. Not all do it that way, but some do. Then there's a problem with canyons, both literal canyons, like in the mountains, and urban canyons, where you can't lock on to enough satellites in the sky to get a good fix. If you don't get a good fix, then the odometer is not going to work. So because logs are all about time, but time is audited by distance, FMCSA was very adamant. This thing must be connected to the ECM, and we use the ECM to give us our distance. So what do we use GPS for? Well, we use GPS simply to record the location. That's it. And you can see on your screen here on how accurate we have to be on GPS. Fact of the matter is, virtually all commercial telematics devices will update breadcrumbs much more frequently than what you see on the screen. Every 60 minutes, engine on, off. So bear in mind this, most ELD on the market, most ELDs on the market do things other than just logs. They're part of a transportation management system. They're part of a dispatch system, part of a routing system. And so you can record the distance, record the location. You can record GPS at a much greater frequency than this. This is just what the law allows on logs. In the cab of the truck, there's quite a bit going on in the cab of the truck. Unlike the old rule, they tell us that we must give you a graph grid display. So the electronic log is going to look like a paper log. And that this information must be accessed outside the cab of the truck, which we'll talk to in a minute, and must clearly state on the screen the driver name and the ELD username. So my name, Joel Beal, the passcode that I use to sign in is 4777. So on my electronic log out in my truck, it just says Joel Beal 4777. Carrier name and address, engine hours and distance for each driving period. This is one of those things FMCSA threw in there just to make sure that the vendor really is connected to the engine. Malfunction diagnostic status. We have to provide a flat file, we being the vendor, to the roadside officer so that the roadside officer can see if the unit has been powered down or tampered with or disconnected from the engine. And then unassigned driver miles. Well, if you don't know this yet, let me just break the news to you. You can cheat electronic logs just like you can cheat paper logs. And the way you do that is by driving the truck without signing on. And the most common way of doing it is driving for an hour in the morning and then signing on, or signing off at the end of your shift and then driving another hour. The way the FMCSA is addressing that is they want us to record all unassigned miles and time and to warn the drivers. Again, this is nothing new. The major vendors have been doing this for 20 years. They are telling us, and we'll get into the status changes in a minute, but the FMCSA is telling us how we handle status changes. And then lastly, the device must be mounted and secured when moving. And here's why. You have to have a black box connected to the truck, but nothing says that that black box that's recording all the stuff from GPS, that's recording all the stuff from the ECM, nothing says that that black box has to be connected via cable to the display unit, which you can see on the dash in this picture here. In fact, many of us give you the option. You can either cable connect the display in, or you can use Bluetooth, a wireless connection. And FMCSA knows that. So what they're saying is if you're going to use a tablet, an Android device, or some untethered thing They don't want it floating around in the cab, becoming a hazard if you wreck the truck. It has to be mounted and secured when you're moving. So let's next talk about how does the roadside officer get the logs out of the cab of the truck. Here's the problem. Law enforcement, CVSA, which is kind of the trade organization, I guess, if you will, of law enforcement, CVSA prefers that their members do not climb in and out of the cab of the truck. Most drivers prefer that the officer not climb in and out of the cab of the truck. So how do we get the log out of the truck cab if it's electronic? Well, the most common is going to be tablets that are connected via Bluetooth, so you just hand your tablet out the window or take it into the scale house with you. That's not addressed here. It's assumed that these devices will be fixed mounted, so they're asking us to do at least 2 of the 5 items you see on your screen. We have USB, web services, Bluetooth, email, or printout. So you don't have to have a printout, but you can. You don't have to be able to email the log, but you can. Bluetooth probably isn't going to be used that much. There's some issues with viruses that most of us that are on the technical side are a little leery of Bluetooth, just like we're a little leery of USB. Web services, I think, will be the most common. And this, think of it this way. The driver punches a button on the display, and it gives them a 6 or 7 digit number, a one-use token. That number to the officer, he types it into his system, his or her system, and there's your last 7 days logs. That's a one-use number, one time only. That'll probably be the most common. Let's talk next about log edits. And log edit is when the driver forgets to do something. So the 10% of you who are experienced at this, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Your good drivers will typically always remember to log on. But if they're at the end of a very long, hard day, they will sometimes forget to log off. I sometimes forget to log off, and I work here. So we must provide a mechanism for editing. And as you experienced people know, edits are allowed under the current rule, the AOBRD rule, by the office only. Well, it's different now. The driver can edit, but the office must approve, or the office can edit, but the driver must approve. So edits are a two-way street now, and all edits are tracked and the original records are retained. So if I forget to log off at 6 o'clock last night, the computer is going to think I'm on duty not driving all night. I'll be out of hours this morning. So either I can go in and say, whoops, I made a mistake, I should have logged off at 1800 last night, or the office can do the same thing. But in any case, that original record has to be retained. Tamper resistant, we had a lot of discussion about what is tamper resistant. There's 3 rules we got to follow. And again, these are questions to ask your supplier when you're out looking for a system that meets the old rule and you're wondering if they're going to meet the new rule. Ask them these same questions. Some of the devices out on the market are very old, may not meet some of these. So we're self-diagnostic and we do reporting via flat file. So law enforcement can see if the device is working. Reasonably resistant to tampering, meaning you can't just unplug it. You can't easily unplug it. And in the event of an edit, the original data is unalterable and not erasable. The next thing to talk about here, so we talked about tamper resistance and connection to the ECM. We talked about GPS. Automatic status changes. So for everyone on the call, this is going to be new. For the 10%, this is new. For the rest of you, it's still new. The old rules weren't this clear. You are moved up to the drive line. So envision in your head a typical driver's log. You have 4 statuses on there. Sleeper or off duty is line 1, sleeper is line 2, driving is line 3, and on duty not driving is line 4. And if you're an oil field driver, then off duty well site's line 5. So you have 4 statuses, 5 if you're an oil field service company. When we see wheel movement, we automatically move you. Once the driver logs into the system, you're on duty, not driving. When we see wheel movement, then you're moved up to the drive line. You're moved up to line 3 automatically. When the vehicle stops, moving, everything freezes for the moment, and then within 5 minutes, we warn the driver. And what we ask the driver and how we ask the driver is kind of up to us, but it's something along the lines of, are you on duty or are you still driving? If there is no response from the driver, then you're automatically switched to on duty, not driving. So again, you move up to line 3 from line 4, so you go from on duty, not driving, up to driving when we see wheel movement, and then you move from line 3, driving, back down to on duty, not driving, line 4, automatically when the driver responds to a prompt that says, yes, I'm not driving. Or if the driver responds to a prompt says, I'm not driving, then we'll move you. If the driver doesn't respond, we'll move you. If the driver responds, I'm still driving, then we'll keep you on the drive line. This is called the rush hour rule. Under today's systems, the AOBRD systems, we hardwire in these numbers. So we can actually move you to on duty, not driving when you're sitting in the middle of traffic on the Santa Monica Freeway. No other duty status changes are allowed. And this is the same in the old rule, although the old rule got bent a lot by some of the vendors out there. It is very clear in the new rule. We cannot assume you're off duty. Only the driver can assume that the driver's off duty, because only the driver knows if what he or she is doing meets the test of off duty. Just because you have a routing system, and just because you have routed the driver to spend the evening at a motel, and just because we can clearly see you're at the motel because of GPS, you're in the geofence, and the ignition key is off, we can see all of that. We cannot assume that you're off duty. The driver has to specifically say on duty, whether the driver's on duty or off duty. So the last thing we have to talk about is driver harassment. And this was a big deal. Again, in 1988, Congress, can't believe I'm going to say Congress and foresaw in the same sentence, but Congress foresaw the potential for harassment. So in 1988, they made a rule, made a law. We can't harass the driver. So what does that mean? What that means is when the driver's in sleeper mode, we mute the audible alerts. We don't wake the driver up. This is just good common sense, but I got to tell you, I've seen common sense broken a lot. When the driver's on his 10-hour break, you let him sleep. Number one. Number two, when you're in personal conveyance mode, and you might have questions on personal conveyance, we can answer these later, but personal conveyance is just when you're using the truck to commute in, to and from a motel or to and from work. And there's some rules that apply, but the point is you're in a commercial motor vehicle, but you're actually not on duty. It's called personal conveyance, and we have to reduce the accuracy shown on the logs to a 10-mile radius so that on the log an officer can't see exactly where you are when you're on your off time. Now, dispatch systems, you can still pin the truck down to 90 feet like you're doing today, but on the log it's a little different. The driver certifies all log edits. So if the office makes an edit, the driver certifies it. And the driver has access to all logs. So what those last two mean is that if you, the manager, say, driver, I think you should have been off duty during this lunch break, and the driver says, no, I wasn't on duty, you can move that line, you can edit that log. The driver doesn't have to certify it. Now, what happens if the driver refuses to certify the edit? Nothing, actually. It's just a marker for law enforcement to make them ask the question. And the driver has access to all logs. And what this means is when the driver leaves your job and goes somewhere else, you have to give them their last 6 months of logs. So let's talk about, and I'll make this next one a little short. This is the stuff that we as vendors have to go through to certify. So the FMCSA has a checklist, and it's a long checklist. And we have a website, And we go to the website, we download the checklist, we start to go through this lengthy checklist, and at the end of the checklist, we self-certify, we declare that we have met all the requirements, and we submit to the FMCSA our successful checklist certification and user documentation, and they certify us. What that means is nobody's really checking up on us. It's the honor system. And it's the honor system because the FMCSA says they don't have the budget to check all of us. Now, there's already problems. There's already what appears to be some non-compliant devices that are on the portal. And the FMCSA has told us that if a device appears to be non-compliant, or if a complaint is registered by a driver or a carrier, that they'll look at these devices on a case-by-case basis. But we have to go through a fairly lengthy certification process. The checklist was only made known to us last month, and I will tell you that regardless of who your vendor is, don't expect them to have their name on the FMCSA website for another 3 or 4 months. It's going to take some time to do this right. So when you pick a supplier, I'll tell you to only use a supplier that's certified. I'll also tell you that right now, if you go to the website, it's going to be fairly empty. But when you're picking a supplier, when you're asking these questions, and again, if you're part of the 10% who already has a system, you're probably okay. But ask these questions anyway. If you're looking for a system, you got to ask. And so if they're not certified, and it's unreasonable to think they are certified right now, just ask them these questions. Here's this this guy from Texas gave this presentation. Here it is. Tell me how you meet these. Just ask the question, and ask for the documentation. Ask for the driver documentation that they supply. Ask for the documentation they use, both internally and to test to. And you'll be able to tell by reading it whether it's the real deal or not. And then ask if they fit your rules. There's a lot of rules. Now, we're not talking about Canada, but you can expect an ELD mandate in Canada virtually any day now. And it's going to be very similar to the U.S. So if you run in Canada, every province has different rules, plus there's a federal rule. In the United States, several different states have their own rules. Oilfield has rules, water well. Just whatever your rules are, make sure that the rules that you operate under are covered. So if you are an agricultural carrier in California and you operate under the California Ag exemption, make sure your supplier can handle the Ag exemption. And make sure they give you the ability to audit and report on hours of service without looking at every log every day. This isn't a requirement. This is just a best practice. We've had 25 years of practice with electronic logs here, so you can expect your supplier should be able to give you the ability to edit and audit logs without having to look at every log. And lastly, just don't wait until the last day. And we can talk a little bit about that during a Q&A, but it's going to take a while to find a system, pick a system, and put it in. So the last thing I wanted to cover here before we kind of get into, some of the nuts and bolts of it is what to expect during an audit. And the answer is on the roadside, it's going to be a little different. The first thing the officer is going to look at on the roadside is this ELD device compliant. So for the next 2 years, this is going to be there's going to be some grace here. Or for the next 4 years, if you're currently running a system. So for the 10% of you that have a system, you've got 4 years where there will be grace. But at the end of that 4-year period, or 2 years for the rest of you, they're going to look, is there a decal or some sticker on this device that shows that it's compliant? Us vendors have to put a sticker on the device showing that we tested and that it's certified and met. And they're going to want to see your driver's handbook. Your driver doesn't necessarily have to use a handbook. They have it all memorized. That's fine. And I will tell you that a well-designed system, the driver shouldn't have to refer to a book. It should be very intuitive. Punch a button and go. But the officer will probably want to see the decal and the handbook. And then the next question is, show me your logs. Well, we're not giving them a logbook anymore. So we may choose to electronically transfer these logs to their Aspen system. And this is the Bluetooth, this is the USB, or this is the web token that we talked about. The driver says, type in the 7-digit number, types in the number, here's my logs, or here's a USB shuttle. Or if you happen to have a printer in the cab and you want to print out the logs, that's fine, or email the logs. Or, and it's not on the official checklist here, but if you have a device that isn't tethered to the cab, or if it is tethered but the cable's long enough, just hand it out the window. He just wants to see your logs. Paper logs are accepted if you're a casual driver, which I don't know if we talked about that or not. A casual driver is a driver who only drives 8 days or less out of any rolling 30-day period. So if you're a casual driver, you're allowed paper logs. If you're in a rental truck or if there's a device failure, you're allowed to do paper logs. And the same applies if you're a time card driver, just like we talked about before. And in the cab of the truck, you have to keep 7 days logs plus the current, just like you do today. So you still have to keep the same amount of logs. It's just what you show them is going to be a little different. In the office, the same conditions that trigger an audit today are going to trigger an audit tomorrow. It's going to be the same old everything. They're going to audit you because of a random. They're going to audit you because of a probable or post-accident. They're going to audit you for the reasons they audit you. And if you've been through an audit, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, they're going to give you some notice, unless they think there's an imminent hazard, which they won't. They'll give you some notice. They'll have a list of drivers they want to look at, and you got to come up with 6 months previous logs. You have to retain 6 months logs. What will be different is you can let them view the logs on your screen in the office. You can give them a computer terminal and say, here's the logs, or you can print them out. It's up to you. They may ask to see the original logs where edits are made. When you make an edit, we, the vendor, have to clearly show it, and they may ask for the originals. The difference is they're going to ask for these supporting documents, and supporting documents have to be maintained by date, by driver. So you thought the paper was going away? Well, unless you have an imaging system, and several of us vendors are going towards an imaging system where you take pictures of these receipts, but unless you have an imaging system, paper is not going away. So if you're going to audit the logs for Joel Beal in December of 2015, then I need to find all the toll receipts or payroll records or something for Joel Beal from December 2015. Now, item number 6 is interesting. This whole ELD thing, you're not required to have real-time data transfer. You could have a standalone device that doesn't have real-time data. You can have GPS without having real-time data. And there's one device that I know of, a pretty good device actually, that has no communications capability. It's just Wi-Fi when you're back in the office, or USB. The driver's got 13 days to get the logs from the truck to the office. It doesn't have to be instant. But again, in the office you have to have 6 months, and in the truck you have to have 7 days. So let's talk about the last thing I want to go over is why is it a good idea to adopt now? I'm not suggesting that you go out and do anything rash, not that you would, nor should you take my advice. Time to get thinking. I've been playing with electronic logs since 1988. I've been playing with them virtually from day one. The month after they were allowed, I started messing with electronic logs. And I've been on the fleet side. I've managed a pretty large tanker outfit where we had electronic logs. I've been a vendor and doing what I do today. I'm still a vendor, and I do a lot of consulting. I do consulting for government agencies, but I do consulting for fleets. And you know, you can wait too late. Here's the thing. Number one, for the past 20 some odd years, companies have voluntarily spent money, and good money. These older devices that are 10, 15, 20 years old, You'd be shocked if you knew how much they cost. I mean, thousands of dollars per truck. They spent good money on these devices, not because of the electronic logs. Electronic logs are the cherry on top of the sundae. They had a lot of other reasons, and these reasons are generally return on investment. So it may not apply to your fleet. You may not see an ROI, but you may at least think about it. And some of the ROI factors are payroll accuracy. We want to pay our drivers accurately. There's nothing worse than having unhappy employees because we're paying them wrong. Now, it's no good to overpay either, but it's certainly no good to underpay, not in today's environment. So payroll accuracy and the time savings from automating payroll might be a good ROI for you. Just remember this, logging in and out of an ELD is clocking in and out. That device can become your time clock if you allow it to. Vehicle usage and utilization. By vehicle usage, I mean we want to make sure that we don't have unauthorized vehicle usage. Both from a cost perspective and from an accident exposure perspective. There's no sense in having my truck on the road unless it needs to be on the road. And also utilization. These telematics devices are a great tool to see how you're utilizing your fleet. Maybe you don't have enough trucks. Maybe you have too many. And MPG. Tell you a little story here. We, again, at the tanker outfit that I used to work at, we weren't technically forced to put in electronic logs, but we were kind of forced into it. We were hauling some really nasty stuff, and I guess our safety record could have been a little better. And I'm fresh out of college, and it sounded like a fun project to me, so I signed up. Man, I want to do it. And my boss, the president of our company, said, tell me how these systems are going to pay for themselves. And my first thought was, I don't know, we could stay in business. Wasn't a good answer. So I decided that we'd set up this schema to improve MPG, and it was fabulously successful. We gave the drivers an incentive bonus, and I was afraid we were going to be paying the drivers too much, but I way underestimated the savings to our fleet. We gained almost a full MPG across a 600 truck fleet. We gained, well, actually a little over, like 1.1 MPG in a year. And we did this by cutting down on speeding, monitoring shifting habits. Idle time was a big one, and believe it or not, hard brakes. And this is a well, it'd be about 1990 by now. This is 1990. This is 26 years ago. And these same factors still hold true today. The Technology and Maintenance Council of the ATA, American Trucking Association, tells us that today's driver in today's truck, even with all these electronic controls, can still affect fuel economy by 35% by how they drive. So payroll accuracy is a big ROI factor, but MPG can sometimes be bigger. Vehicle usage utilization is a big deal. Safety. We have found over these years of experience and millions of miles of experience with our client fleets that the same habits that save fuel can also be safe driving habits. As an example, you're an 80,000-pound truck. You see this green light half a mile down the street, and it's been green forever. You know that that light is going to be red before you get there. You might as well back off the throttle. There's no sense in ramming up to the light and nailing the brakes. That's very wasteful. Furthermore, that kind of easy driving that I'm talking about is economical with fuel. So a lot of these safe driving habits also give you better MPG and vice versa. And then lastly is litigation defense. You know, if there's ever an accident between your truck and a car, a four-wheeler, the truck's going to be assumed at fault until you can prove otherwise. And a lot of these devices have accident reconstruction capabilities. So you may have a reason to comply early just because of these cost savings. A lot of fleets have been doing this for 20 some odd years. But let's assume that there is no ROI for you. You just want to comply. Well, it takes a little bit of time to pick the right system. And on the last slide here, I'll have my email and phone number. So if you don't have if you don't feel like asking a question, you can ask me later. I actually wrote a book. I wrote a little ebook, about a 50-page ebook, on how to pick a good technology for your fleet. First, you got to come up with a criteria. And number one, what is your criteria? Do you just want to comply with electronic logs? Do you want to do more? Do you want to automate fuel tax? Do you want to automate payroll? Do you want to make this part of a dispatch system? What do you want? And then number two, you got to pick a vendor, and you have to pick a long list, those that you think will meet your criteria, and then you pick a short list. After some amount of vetting, whether it's interviews or references or even a test, you pick your short list and you pick your vendor. And if you do a good job, this will take several months. Once you pick your system, it takes a while to install the system. Many systems are plug-in, where you plug them into the diagnostic port. Some are still hardwired in. The more advanced systems are kind of wired in because they're monitoring seat belts and PTOs and roll-up doors and temperatures and things like that. But regardless, whether you're just plugging the system in or wiring it in, it will take you some time to get these devices, get them out to the trucks, and get them put in. And it's going to take some time to do training. Drivers got to be trained. You've got to be trained. This process that I'm laying out here could easily take 6 months. Could take longer. And we have a little less than 2 years. So if it takes 6 or 8 months to pick a system and another couple of months to get comfortable with it, we've blown a year. So I would advise you not to wait until the last minute. With that, I'll open it up for questions. If you guys have anything, just let me know.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Joel, and we really appreciate that real in-depth presentation. And we have a couple of more minutes left. So if someone has a question or two, please don't hesitate to type it in. One that did come in, Joel, during the presentation, someone asked a specific technical question. They have a non-CDL driver that delivers a truck to a different state twice a week, and they drop off the truck and they pick up another truck to drive back to the depot. So the same two trucks go back and forth between depots. One is required to run a logbook, but then the truck is delivered by another person that doesn't require a logbook. Would you need to have an ELD in both trucks? So do both drivers have to log into the ELD when driving the truck?
Yeah, that probably is going to require a longer answer than what we have time for, but long story short, this is a driver-by-driver, truck-by-truck thing. And generally speaking, if one driver is required to have a CDL in a specific truck because of weight or placards, so is the other. But in any case, if there's two drivers in this truck, if even one driver in the truck is required to have a CDL, then yes, you have to have a device in the truck.
Okay, that is good to know. And Joel, also, if people want to, this is obviously a new topic, and as we're all getting educated, want to continue to get more information and updates, what are some good sources? Can you provide those to them? Are there other places where people can stay informed about this?
Yeah, feel free to email me or visit our website. I will tell you, as far as the mandate itself is concerned, the best source I have found is the FMCSA's own website. They have done an excellent job of explaining the mandate. So feel free to email me, but I would recommend my first stop being the FMCSA's website.
Excellent. All right. Well, we're at the top of the hour, and again, Joel, I'd really like to thank you for providing so much good in-depth information and kind of helping us be prepared in advance, which we really appreciate. And thanks to all our listeners for joining us. And again, Joel has agreed to provide a copy of his presentation so that you can refer back to it. So when I conclude the webinar in just one moment, there'll be a brief survey, and please let us know how we did. Let us know other topics that we can invite experts such as Joel and others to answer questions that are on your mind. All right, and just help you do your jobs better. So thanks again, Joel, for putting this together. Thank you to JBA Telematics, and thanks to all our listeners out there, and we'll see you all the next time. Take care.